Welcome to Beyond the Flight Deck podcast with United Airlines pilot and investment advisor, Alan Bewley, who will take you behind the scenes with airline pilot entrepreneurs, academics, and other professionals. And now, your host, Alan Bewley.
So with me today, the CEO of United Airlines, Scott Kirby. Scott, welcome Beyond the Flight Deck.
Thank you, Alan. Glad to be here.
It's great having you. Again, thank you and your team for making this happen today. I know you're a busy guy. So let's get to know Scott. You grew up in a small town in Texas outside of Dallas. I understand you're the oldest of six.
That's correct.
Yeah, I grew up with one brother. Give me a high-level view. What's it like growing up in a family of six? What did your parents do for a living? What was life like growing up there in a small town in Texas?
I did grow up in a small town. It's big now because the George Bush freeway now goes through that small town, Rowlett. But at the time, it was small. My dad was an accountant. My mom stayed at home. And everything seemed normal to us. Looking back on it, we had 6 or 8 people then living in a 1,400 square foot house. So we were crowded, but it was fun. And the best thing I think was I had wonderful, loving parents who were super involved in everything we did. I remember in 3rd grade, Miss Spillman, my 3rd grade teacher, told me she was going to call my mom about something I'd been arguing with her about. And I said, well, you can do that, but you're the one that's going to be in trouble. And that's exactly what happened. My mom.
Moms can be that way.
Yeah.
Moms can be that way. Sibling rivalries going on in the household. Were you, you're obviously a Marine charging a hill, a go-getter type.
Yeah.
Were there a lot of those in the house?
I think everyone, we kind of all grew up that way. We tend to take our personality from my mom, who's one of the most competitive people anyone would ever meet. She actually, we started Trivial Pursuit, and she was good at the blue and the green, which I think are literature and geography, but she memorized all the answers to all the blues and all the greens without telling us. So she would always have safe places to land. Anyway, that sort of competitive spirit got drilled into us at a very, very early age, all of us.
That's intimidating. It's totally intimidating. At what point, or what drove you to, or what point did you decide, hey, this military academy, whether it was Air Force, whether it was any of them, do you remember at what point you said, okay, this is what I want to do? And you can't just get good grades, right?
Yeah.
You've got to go above and beyond to get that appointment. Talk a little bit about that.
So I've always been a really big reader. From the time I was a kid to today, today I read about 3 hours a day on average. Stuff to do, nothing to do with work. And I did when I was a kid too. And by 9th grade, I had read every single book that they had on World War II in the small town library. And World War II, the Battle of Britain was about air power. The Battle of the Pacific was air power, naval air power, but it was about air power. And so I decided I wanted to be a pilot and an astronaut. And so set my sights by the time I was a freshman in high school. And I'm going to the Air Force Academy to be a pilot, and ironically turned out didn't wind up going to pilot training. I think I was the only person in my graduating class that was physically qualified that voluntarily decided not to go, which was kind of a big deal not to go. But that's how I wound up going, because I'd been fascinated with air power from World War II, really.
Yeah, I took a World War II passion from my father, so I'm with you there. The aviation bug is something that grabs some people and holds them forever, as far as being in the cockpit, but there are other ways to skin that aviation cat.
Yeah.
So I understood also you were a big athlete and you want to be a professional football player, but I guess we can't all be Tom Brady, huh?
Yeah, I don't know that I was a big athlete. I had big aspirations to be an NFL player. By the way, my 8-year-old son, a couple of weeks ago, when his mother was telling him to do his homework, told him he didn't need to do his homework because he's going to play in the NFL. So he's taking after me. He's not going to be in the NFL just like I wasn't in the NFL.
Yeah, give us a call in about 20 years and let us know. That'd be great.
But I loved playing sports growing up and the competition. And still like anything that's competitive.
Sure. Yeah. So you took that competitive nature right to the Air Force Academy, which is a great place to be competitive, right? That's a tough environment. you end up in computer science and then this operations research thing that's interesting to me. I've done a little reading on that since I read your bio. Computer science at that time was still kind of a growing, relatively newer thing. I talked to Paul Carlson about his background in computers before coming, a long time ago. He was a little bit earlier than you. How much of your time did you focus on the computer side of things versus talk a little bit about this ops research? I noticed you also went on and got a master's.
Operations research is really, it's mostly math, but it's supposed to be cross-discipline. It's math, economics, and computer science. So it's more applied math is the way it's meant to be, and that's what I got my graduate degree in. But they're closely related. They were both interesting to me and pretty easy. So I still to this day sleep about 8.5 hours a night. People that know me from the Air Force Academy still give me grief for I would go to bed at 9 or 9:30 while everyone else stayed up and studied. I've always believed that sleep was important. And did it there. But so anyway, I wound up double majoring in those two things, mostly because they were interesting.
Hey, look, I learned to fly airplanes when I was 15. My dad is a retired United pilot, and that kept me from being a complete idiot in high school and college.
It's good to have some focus.
The academics wasn't for me. Luckily, I found finance later that grabbed me more academically. Coming out of the academy, tell me a little bit about just timeline. Your master's at George Washington, you did some time at the Pentagon and something that's interesting to me. What was the timeline there?
So I went straight from the Air Force Academy. Well, I had to go to 4 months of training, but then went straight to my only assignment in the Air Force was working in the Pentagon. I worked his name was Dr. Chu, Office of Program Acquisition and Evaluation. He was one of the undersecretaries. So super cool job, 21 years old, heading to Washington, D.C. To work in an economics office. Great experience, wonderful. While there, I originally was going to get my MBA, but I realized all of my friends, I was helping them with their MBA homework, even though I'd never taken an MBA class. And so I decided to do it in operations research, which was good, which was fun. And then my big question was, I got out early because it was 1989, and so into the Cold War. It was a brief period where there was an early out that you could get out early, and so I signed up for it. But before that, I had signed up, applied to have the Air Force send me to get my PhD in math, and I got the same week I got accepted to an early out program or to go to Stanford and get my PhD. Had I done that, the Air Force would have paid me. I'd have gotten captain's salary to go and get paid, for 2.5 years to live, and be a student. But then you're sort of committed for life to the Air Force. And I joked about it at the time, like, well, I got, this kind of guaranteed thing, or I'm going to quit with no idea what I'm going to do afterwards. I don't even own a civilian suit. I got to go buy a suit for interviews. But anyway, I decided to go that route. It all worked out.
So you went to GW after you were done with the military?
No, I did it while I was there. GW has a lot of programs like this because they're there in DC, that they're a night program. So I would get to work at 7 a.m, leave at 5. The classes started at 6. They went from 6 to 10 at night. So that's the only time in my life I didn't get 8.5 hours sleep. Was that couple of years while I was going to school, because I went to work, school, home, to sleep, and then did it all again the next day.
That was my entire my entire college career. I went to school at night, flew all day, and went to school at night, started over. All right. So then you jump into working at Sabre, a subsidiary of AMR. And if I'm not mistaken, Sabre, that's the old res system we used forever, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, and at the time it wasn't Sabre. It was a company called American Airlines Decision Technologies, which did all the math. So they built the first revenue management system in the world, all the crew scheduling systems that you still use, that still decide your trips today. All that got started at AADT. It later got merged into Sabre, but we did that, and so that was a cool job too. I spent a year and a half down at Continental right as they were coming out of bankruptcy and CalLight, right when Gordon Bethune got, I never met Gordon when I was there. I was just a consultant. But the interesting thing was I worked in a small office in their scheduling group. And there were only 4 people in scheduling at Continental at the time. The head of the department was a guy named Glenn Howenstein, now the president of Delta. And then Andrew Nacella was a new hire analyst in the group, now our chief commercial officer.
Right.
So we were 3 of 5 people all sitting together back at Continental in whatever that was, 1994.
Not a big decision, I assume, to go from there to America West.
Well, in a way it was, because I was viewed as a rising star at American. And back then in 1995, American was the leading global airline, best in technology, thought of themselves that way. Others thought of them that way. And so I interviewed with little America West, who was just coming out of bankruptcy, much smaller, no infrastructure. And then they sent me to talk to the VP, one of the VPs, to try to convince me to stay. And they said, we rank all the people at this level, and you're ranked the highest of anyone. If you just stick around here in 10 to 15 years, you'll be a vice president. And which was meant to be like an appealing career for me.
Right.
And I thought, 10 to 15 years, out of here.
Yeah. No, I know. Because in just a few years at America West, you went from senior director to a VP to you moved up pretty quickly there in just a couple of years.
It was a small company, and it was the kind of place. All the other interesting story, Bill Franke, who some of your viewers may know, because he was the one that he bought Spirit out of bankruptcy. He's made a fortune. Bought Frontier. He's going to now control the combined Frontier, Spirit, Wizz Air, Volaris, a bunch of low-cost carrier startups after he left America West. But he's also a hard ass. But when I interviewed with him, he asked me why I was leaving American for America West. Like, who does that? You're at this big, and I said, well, at American, if I want to change anything and try something new, you got to spend 6 months proving that you won't break something. So it's impossible to change anything. He said, well, at America West, everything is completely effed up. So you can do anything you want. If it works, you'll get promoted, and if it doesn't work, you'll get fired.
You get fired.
I was like, all right, I like that.
Yeah. No, for a guy with your personality, I think it seems just fine.
And I know you didn't ask this question, but since we're on personal stuff about me, it's a fun story I like to tell. Along those lines, at one point, I was the VP of Revenue Management.
Right.
I got in a fight. My boss was the executive vice president, and got in a screaming match with him on a Friday afternoon about some promotion he wanted to do to lower the ticket prices. And I was saying, we got demand through the roof. We don't need to do that. And we got in a screaming match. Like, the assistants came over and closed the door. They later said everyone left the floor because we were dropping F-bombs at each other. And then I went home that night, and I got a call from someone I didn't know, and said, Bill wants to see you at the Franke & Company offices at 8 a.m. tomorrow. And I was like, well, what's Franke & Company? I didn't even know. He had a separate sort of like investment. And so I told my wife at the time, oh my God, I'm going to get fired. I can't believe it. And so I put on a nice suit, and I went to the office, and I went in there, and he talked to me, and he said, we've decided to promote you to a new job, and tell me what the job was. And then as I'm getting ready to leave, he said, oh, by the way, John, who was my boss, has decided to leave the company.
Right. Has decided. Yeah. So he wasn't wrong when you interviewed there. You screwed up and you're gone.
He followed through on it.
Yeah, he followed through on it. Okay, so you've been through a couple mergers, America West, US Air American. From a pilot perspective, those mergers have just been daunting. What was the most challenging stage of that? The first, the second, or all three of them together?
Well, so
for you,
America West, US Airways, we were naive. We underappreciated a lot. One, we made a massive mistake on the systems. We just basically let each group pick their own system, and whoever the person was in charge of the reservation system in particular pick shares. By the way, something that when I talked to Jeff Smizek, he asked my advice when the United Continental merger happened. I had a bunch of things. I said, but number one, don't let anyone tell you to pick shares. It's a mistake. Here we are today with it.
Yeah, with shares, right?
Yeah, but so we had a bunch of mistakes there. We also, the pilot integration there was we left it to the pilots was a nightmare.
Right.
Mostly it stayed in the pilot ranks. It affected the company. They were mad at each other much more than us. We were sort of innocent bystanders.
Right.
But it did learn the lesson. The lesson that I learned from it was that we couldn't just leave seniority integration to the pilot process without making sure everyone agreed up front exactly what it was going to be, which we later used at American US Airways. Probably the bigger set of lessons I learned, because we had 2 other attempts. We went at the hostile bid for Delta,
Right.
which we would have won, but labor was opposed to it. So lesson learned there: you got to get the labor groups on your side,
right,
to have any hope of success. And we should have learned that from the first one because we'd seen the problems, and then learned a lot from the. I don't know how many people know, but United US Airways, we had a deal, and I led the negotiations for it. I can remember being at dinner with Kathy Mickles, who was the CFO, and she led the negotiations for United. We'd signed the deal. We had the press release that we were going to work on, and just the 2 of us went kind of to celebrate in Washington, D.C. I don't know why we did the negotiations in D.C.
Yeah, I remember all of it. But
and she said, "Oh, by the way, we decided to leak it and see what the market thinks about this."
Oh.
And I was panicked. I didn't act panicked, but as soon as I sent an email to somebody that said, as soon as I finish dinner, we got to get on the phone.
Right.
Like, because we knew Continental was going to try to get involved.
Yeah.
And anyway, but then the American deal, was interesting. It's amazing to me. Good lessons for me, but amazing to watch what's happened there since.
Yeah.
Because we went and it started. I flew to New York by myself. First to meet with the head of the flight attendants union, a woman named Laura Gladding, and one advisor of hers. And I remember to try to convince them to do the merger. And I was scheduled to see the head of the pilots the next week. But with her, I'd flown in, had dinner, and she said, at the end of it all, we talked the whole time. She said, "What are you doing? What are you doing in New York tomorrow?" And I said, "Oh, I got a 7 a.m. flight." And she knew that I'd come straight from the airport because I still had my bag.
Right.
And she looked at me and she said, "You flew all the way from Phoenix to New York just to have dinner with me?" I said, "Well, yeah." And then she said, Tom Horton, who's the CEO of American Time, won't even return my phone calls.
Yeah.
And I texted on the way home. I texted Doug Parker and said, "We're going to get this deal done because we actually care about people, and they don't." But we learned a lot there. It's sad in a way. It's good in a way for me to watch what's happening there because we're a competitor. But to watch, because we had such great relationships. I mean, I was friends with, the people, the ALPA. There were 21 people at ALPA. 18 of them were ex-military, so that gave me a leg up. Like I think 11 of them were ex-Air Force Academy.
Oh yeah.
At that time, but we had good relationships, and we didn't agree on everything, but we had good relationships. We talked to each other. Anyway,
in my discussion with Ankit about his kind of move up through the process at American, when you were there, he was in a leadership development program that it's interesting to me. It gave him exposure to a lot of different moving pieces. Is that something you did when you moved on to American as well, or was that something that wasn't offered at I know you're
so when I first went to AADT, I was on that same track where they gave you different things to do. Of course, by the time I went back, I was the president, so there was only one other job to take. So I didn't get to move around then. But it was a good program. But I changed it when I was at American, actually, because they would move people every 12 to 18 months, which was way too fast.
Okay.
So you just had all these people that just didn't know much about it. And you'd move them into some technical disciplines, like moving somebody into crew scheduling who'd never done it before.
And go, "Here, you're managing director of this department. Good luck."
Yeah, it's and it works at the lower levels, but once you get into more senior levels, you need to have enough expertise to understand what's going on.
Right.
I think.
Your departure from American to United, was it, and I'm asking because I don't know.
Okay.
Was it made clear to you weren't going to be CEO there anytime soon?
I'll tell you the story.
Yeah.
I've told it before. The story was 3 months before I left, there'd been a number of people recruiting me to go be CEOs of other companies, including there was a hostile an investor group that wound up, putting new board members on at United, and they're people that I'd known for a long time, and they wanted me to come to United. So all that was going on, and so at the end of one of the board meetings, they had a succession planning discussion and made a decision to give me a date that I would be CEO. I didn't ask for it, didn't know anything about it, but Doug Parker asked me to go to dinner, which is weird because usually if we went to dinner it was with our wives, but it wasn't this time. Anyway, he said, he was going to retire on a certain date, and as long as I would commit to staying at American, the board had decided to make me CEO on that date. And of course, I said great, and I was really happy. And then 3 months later, and everything is going well. Doug walked into my office on a Monday afternoon. He was pulling a rollerboard because he was on his way to the airport to go on a 2-week vacation to Europe. And on his way out the door, he had a little sheet of paper that he read, and it was very awkward. His hands were shaking because we were friends, not just coworkers. Like, we used to take our kids to Disney together.
Yeah.
And see, he didn't say you're fired, but he said, I've decided that I'm going to stay longer, and because of that, it won't be tenable for us to work together anymore.
Wow.
And 4 weeks and a day later, I was at United.
Yeah.
After that.
4 weeks and a day later, luckily that was 2016 and you didn't show up right. So let's fast forward a little bit, just for a sake of time. I think as an employee of 26 years, for this transition, when Smizek was gone, Oscar was the right choice because he I think his character was so great for the time. Now I want someone operationally driven, motivated to grow this company, quite obviously. And, we think we found that in you. Yeah. But if you go back a little bit in time, George W. Bush takes office, and 9 months later, it's 9/11. President Obama gets sworn in right in the midst of the financial crisis. So two different situations, but both crises. COVID for you came, it was a slow moving train coming down a tunnel. Your first or your last few months being president before, how much of that did you take home with you? That must have been a daunting knowing that you were taking this thing over at that time.
Yeah, well, fortunate, and thanks for the good things you said about Oscar. It's very true. And Oscar was great even from the beginning because he knew the transition. He let me just run with it. And he was supportive, and we talked every day, but he let me run with it. The reality is, I think COVID, I saw it coming. I think partly because of what I said earlier. I spent 3 hours a day reading. I'm a science geek, and so it seemed obvious to me once it showed up in Italy, which was the last weekend of February, that there was a global pandemic. And I was calling our executive team on that Sunday and saying, I don't know why no one else in the world knows it. This is a global pandemic, and we got to get ready. And the next week, we raised $2 billion of liquidity before anyone. We couldn't have done it a week later, but we did it in a week. But it always seemed, once Italy happened, there were ups and downs, but the general trajectory of COVID was very much what kind of I thought it was going to be. And because that, we weren't really surprised by anything. I think it let us be more clear-eyed on some important decisions. I took some grief early on for, others were saying it's over and let's just get back. And I kept thinking it probably wasn't over. I hoped it was, but probably wasn't. But the most important is we always believed, when everyone else thought like business travel is never coming back or international is never coming, we always thought it. Like, it just never made sense to me. Like it, and by the way, we see that now. Business travel was down 85% the first week of the year in Omicron. It's down like 30% now, and the trajectory looks like this. International, Europe is gangbusters. But that let us keep our fleet, led to ordering more airplanes. It really just, because we had that, because we'd been right and had confidence about the general course, not the day-to-day, but the general course, it let us make completely different decisions than everyone else, which we were eventually going to get there as United anyway because of our people and our network, but it accelerated by a decade, our leap to the head of the industry. And then once we're that big in our hubs, no one can catch up with us unless we screw up, which we're not going to do.
Going into COVID, we had 50% more debt than Delta. American had roughly 50% more than we did. We all now have a lot more. As an employee, that makes you nervous. I'm assuming we still have a ton of liquidity. A lot of it was mortgaged assets that we already had. So, and like you said, we're still down pretty significantly revenue wise. Long term, I assume we want to get back to a much more manageable debt level.
Yeah. So we do. One of the big things for us is to delever. And we took on almost $25 billion of extra debt during the crisis. But we've got $12 billion more cash. So half of that is just cash
Right.
that's sitting on the balance sheet. We're going to always carry more cash now than we did before to have the liquidity to ride out storms like this. But it is going to be important to pay down debt for us. But that's really all about generating cash from operations. And everything on that front to me looks good. The changes that we made more changes at United during COVID than any other airline in the world. Not only did we set ourselves up with United Next for the future and not retire airplanes, but the customer perception around United is dramatically. We have more and more customers who are choosing to fly United, not because we have the cheapest price, but because they believe in us and the service that they get on the airplanes. On our cost structure, we did more with technology to get more efficient. Agent on demand is my favorite example. Right. A gate agent can help somebody in a completely different city when there's a weather issue or something. And we just did more of that. And all of that, I think, is going to, and we're more exposed to the international markets, which are going to be, they're not yet, but they're going to be better than the domestic market. And so that's what's going to be the fuel to pay down debt, but also to, bring on 100 airplanes a year.
Social media is cruel. You know that, and I know that. You gave us town halls during the early days of COVID, telling us what was going on. And then came the hardest town hall where you had to announce that you were going to have to involuntarily furlough some people. And the softer side of Scott showed up. So first question, if I were to ask Mrs. Kirby and your 7 kids, is dad the guy crying at the movie theater at Disney movies? Or was this just really a tough, because look, half of social media was behind you saying, man, it was tough for him to announce. Yeah. Then there are the skeptics out there that, no, that's just a show, right? He's a politician, right?
It's definitely not a show. I was raised, when I was a kid, I talked about my mom earlier, but one of the things that I knew, if I cried for any reason, I got a spanking. It didn't matter what the reason was. The first time I was allowed to cry without getting a spanking, it was when my grandmother died. But absent of death, there was no excuse for it. I definitely didn't want to do that. But you can't help but feel. No. The other I get asked, people ask, like, what keeps you awake at night? And I always joke, I sleep 8.5 hours a night, kind of nothing, which is true. The only time I can remember and I probably have one night a year that I have a hard time going to sleep or something. I mean, literally one a year. And the only time I can remember having more than one night in a row where I couldn't sleep was around that. Because I knew what the implications were. I knew that without, the government, I knew we were going to shut the airline down and furlough everyone. Because that was the only way to even have a chance at survival. And that did weigh heavy. It did weigh heavy on me. That's, I would on anyone.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted you to be able to say that one in public in this forum. Very last question. I love Boeings. I'm a 6-7 captain, flown all the Boeings. Also like Airbuses. I understand that our A350 orders are connected to some GE engines and we can't get out of those contracts. Am I going to retire on the A350, Scott?
Well, before I answer that, I'm going to tell you one other interesting story. It's sort of related to the last question, because the second time we had, that was at that town hall would have been in March or April. First go. Second one was the government loan expired on September 30th, and and we did furlough people. Mostly we got volunteers, and we didn't furlough pilots, but mostly we got volunteers. But that was another time that I was that I was stressed out because I knew what was going to happen. That morning, October 1st of 2020, I got up and I went for a long run. I ran 8.5 miles, just kind of de-stressing, I guess. And I got home, my back was hurting. And I thought, I just ran too far, and I started trying to stretch and getting worse. And I had a bunch of phone calls, a couple of senators, and then I had the Treasury Secretary. And for the Treasury Secretary, I was down on the floor in child's pose with a pillow under my stomach, laying like this, trying to speak and tell. I was in so much pain, I couldn't stand it. And after that, I had my wife take me to the emergency room, and it turned out I had a kidney stone.
Yeah, I was going to say, that doesn't sound like a bad back.
Later that afternoon, our head of government affairs wanted to talk to me about what did the Treasury Secretary say. And I said, Terry, I'm really sorry. I have no idea. I don't think he knew I was completely incoherent. I have no idea what he said. So anyway, now I told that dumb story.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Onto the
The A350.
350. The 350 is a great airplane. I was a launch customer for the 350 when I was back at U.S. Airways. Unfortunately, I actually know the price that we paid for it at U.S. Airways in inflation-adjusted dollars. I know the price that United agreed to pay for it, and they're dramatically different. But it is a great airplane. The question really, and there is an engine issue. That's a one-time expense one way or another. That's going to get overwhelmed by the following. The fleet complexity, having an extra fleet is a couple $100 million a year.
Right.
And so that's hard to do unless we're going to retire another fleet. We are going to start retiring the 777s, in late 26 and 27. So the question, we'll have a real bake-off between Boeing and GE essentially on replacing the 777. Okay. So we'll either have 100 plus A350s or we will have zero. And it will be a purely economic decision around the airplanes. And so I don't know what it'll be yet, because it'll be an economic negotiation, around who wants to win our business. But it'll be 100 plus airplanes of one or the other to replace the 777.
Okay. You're a very young CEO of a big company. What's after United for Scott? Are you, look, a lot of us think you're going to be in politics one day.
No, I'm not going to be terrible in politics. The problem with me being in politics, actually, I want to get stuff done and to just fight. So I won't be. I'm going to spend the rest of my career here at United. I don't know when I'll retire, but it's far away in the future. And such a great platform. It's great people. Building the best airline in the world, and not just that. Like I get the chance to make a far bigger difference in the world than most CEOs do, because we're so high profile. Right. Whether it's what we're doing on sustainability or diversity, like with the Aviation Academy. I get to feel like I'm in the center. I get to be in small rooms with people, with a lot of politicians that are talking about the direction. It's a lot. You can be a lot more influential in a small room like that. So I'm having a blast. I go sleep. I dream about United at night. I think about it all day when I go for runs and things. And it's fun. And I'm going to spend the rest of my career here.
Good. Just don't forget.
And I've told others no. I have had some other people ask me, and I tell everyone no before they even start.
Okay, good. All right. Well, don't forget that work-life balance. Don't always take United home. I want Mrs. Kirby to like Mr. Kirby.
I take it home, but in a good way.
Okay.
I have a great work-life balance. I have 7 kids.
I know. I've got
obviously I have a pretty good work-life balance.
I've got a job, a business, a wife, and 2 kids, and I don't know how you run this big company with 7 kids and a wife. So, and 8.5 hours a night of sleep. Well done, sir.
Thank you.
Hey, Scott, thanks again for joining me today. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.